Hey there, I'm Matt Welch, editor-in-chief of Reason Magazine, flanked by serial entrepreneur and Murray Rothbard fanboy Camille Foster from Freethink Media. Together we are The Independents. Tonight we're joined by a special guest coming to us remote from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, a journalist and commentator who has been busy of late both breaking and making the news. He is Glenn Greenwald, formerly of The Guardian, and now of a new website called The Intercept. Glenn has spent the past year publishing scoops based on the whistleblowing revelations of former NSA employee Edward Snowden. Glenn, welcome to The Independents.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So this past week, like the rest of the month, you've been publishing a series of scoops about how British intelligence have been going online to actively ruin the reputations of people with whom presumably the British government disagrees with. Talk about what you found and what's the importance of it.
These documents were among the ones that I found most shocking pretty early on because they talk about how the British government, and this was in a presentation made to the NSA and three other allies, how the British government and its intelligence agency, the GCHQ, does things like false flag operations, as they call them, where they post very incriminating things to the internet and then attribute it falsely to someone whose reputation they're trying to smear, or they notify their friends and family, or they disseminate destructive information about them. They use honey traps, which is the use of sexually appealing women, whether fictionalized or real, to lure their targets into compromising situations. And it's not just the normal spycraft where they're doing it to the leaders of hostile countries or their military or intelligence officials. It's directed at people who are just dissidents, people with the group Anonymous, people they call hacktivists, normal criminal suspects who have been charged with no crime. They infiltrate online communities. They essentially disseminate deception throughout the internet, making the internet really an untrustworthy place to be.
And Glenn, this story really does seem to build on another story that I saw on the Intercept not too long ago related to WikiLeaks and the fact that both the United States government and foreign governments were in the business of turning these people into essentially enemies, foreign enemies that they could then spy and monitor with NSA tools and resources.
Exactly. I mean, one of the things that the Obama administration and its apologists love to say in response to the 7 months of or 8 months of NSA reporting that we're doing is, well, there's no evidence of any sort of political targeting like there was in the 60s and 70s, and that's absolutely false. Not only is the news story that I just described an example of that, but so too is the one that you just referenced, where what they were doing was they were monitoring people who visited the WikiLeaks website, which could be journalists, it could be supporters, it could be people who are whistleblowers wanting to give information, and they use their access to the fiber optic cables to collect very invasive information, including their IP address, which can enable the government to individually identify somebody. So you have groups like WikiLeaks and Anonymous and hacktivists. We published a story a couple months ago about using the porn habits of people that the government deems radicals to try and destroy their reputation. You know, in every era when the government targets dissidents, those dissidents are never popular. So a lot of people don't like WikiLeaks or hacktivists. Back in the 60s and 70s, people didn't like various civil rights leaders. They didn't like anti-war groups. But the point is, you should not have the government being able to destroy people using covert means. That's why we have due process. The state should only be able to punish people whom they've charged, given a fair trial to, and then convicted.
Glenn, you just won the prestigious George Polk Award for investigative reporting, and they're having their ceremony in April. You've talked about, you're coming to us right now from Brazil, obviously, where you live, for very understandable reasons. You talked recently about how you're not really sure what your reception is going to be at the airport. Your many critics on both right and left accuse you of being sort of self-dramatic for some of this. Are you really scared they're going to put you in cuffs when you come to JFK?
Well, I'm coming back, and I'm coming back quickly and shortly, rather. So I guess I'm not that scared. But when when the top national security officials in the Obama administration, like James Clapper and Keith Alexander, and then leading members of Congress like Peter King and Mike Rogers go around publicly accusing you of being a criminal for the journalism that you're doing, and advocate that you ought to be arrested, on top of a whole variety of other people who have done that, from Alan Dershowitz Mark Thiessen and a bunch of other people, of course you'd be an idiot not to take those accusations and those threats seriously. On top of which, we have a lot of lawyers who are saying that given the Obama administration's track record when it comes to press freedoms, there may be less than a 50% chance that something like that would happen, but it's certainly much greater than trivial. And so you want to be aware of the risks, you want to protect yourself to the greatest extent that you can, and then you want to make sure that you don't succumb to them or acquiesce them and let the government unjustly threaten or bully you. And of course I'm going to return to my own country and not be exiled for the crime of doing journalism. But it's definitely a campaign that they're deliberately doing of being threatening and bullying to try and deter future reporting, even though I think they know by now that it's not going to succeed.
Now, Glenn, you've done a tremendous amount of reporting on a number of these leaked documents from Edward Snowden, and I'm not sure if there are other sources, but in either case, there have been a number of startling revelations. But I wonder if you're at all concerned that the American people, for example, or people internationally might sort of think to themselves, oh, this is old hat, not really paying any attention to some of the stories that are coming out because there's so much of the information.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why we've done the reporting strategy that we've done, which is taken our time and spaced out the stories, is to allow people time to digest them. I think the first week, when we published one story after the next for 5 straight days, even people who work on these issues as experts said that they had a hard time processing stories that were coming that quickly. So I think there are a lot of people who at this point have said, you know what, we know that the NSA has the mentality to invade all forms of electronic human communication and don't necessarily follow every detail of every news story. But when we went back in June and got together, the three of us, Laura Poitras, who's my co-reporter on this story, myself, and our source, Edward Snowden, the thing that he was most worried about was that the world would react with apathy for the revelations that he risked his liberty to expose, and the exact opposite has happened. Here we are 8 months later, and all over the world there's a very serious debate about internet freedom and individual privacy and the role of the state and the media. There's reform efforts all over the world. There's an incredibly bipartisan coalition in Congress that is still very focused on reining in the excesses of the NSA. So it may not be that every single story that we publish 8 months later gets exactly the same attention as the ones we were publishing back in June, but the level of interest internationally among ordinary people around the world is unbelievable and far exceeds anything that we thought in our wildest dreams would be possible.
All right, Glenn, stand by. We'll have more with you next. Also coming up,